He married her out of revenge, but one kiss changed everything. Some promises are written in starlight, whispered between souls before they ever meet. Others are forged in fire, born from desperation and sealed with trembling hands. This is a story of both, where fate wore the disguise of circumstance, and love emerged from the ashes of impossible choices. Meet Sarah Chen, 26 years old with eyes that held the weight of responsibility far beyond her years. An elementary school teacher in the heart of Seattle, she spent her days shaping young minds and her evenings caring for her ailing mother, whose medical bills had transformed their modest home into a house of cards. One strong wind away from collapse, Sarah possessed the kind of beauty that sneaks up on you. Not the glossy magazine kind, but the authentic glow of someone who still believed in goodness despite life's relentless tests. Her students called her Miss Sunshine, unaware that her smiles often masked sleepless nights spent calculating which bill could wait another month. Then there was Marcus Holloway, 32, a self-made tech entrepreneur whose company had just gone public, making him one of Seattle's youngest millionaires. With sharp jawlines that could cut glass and eyes like winter storms, Marcus commanded every room he entered. But wealth hadn't softened him. If anything, it had sharpened his edges. 3 years ago, his younger brother had died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver, and something in Marcus had frozen that day. He buried himself in work, building firewalls around his heart as expertly as he coded security systems. Love, he decided, was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. Their worlds collided on a Tuesday that tasted like rain and regret. Sarah stood in the hospital corridor, clutching a folder of medical bills that might as well have been written in her mother's blood. Stage 4 cancer. Experimental treatment. $200,000. The words swam before her eyes as the oncologist's voice faded into white noise. She had already sold her car, maxed out every credit card, and borrowed from friends who could barely spare it. There was nowhere left to turn. Miss Chen? A voice cut through her fog, smooth, expensive, somehow both cold and magnetic. Sarah looked up to find a man in a tailored charcoal suit standing too close, his presence filling the narrow hallway like smoke. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the doctor. I'm sorry, do I know you? Sarah's instinct was to retreat, but something about his intense gaze held her in place. No, but I know desperation when I see it. Marcus extended a business card between two fingers. I have a proposition that could solve your financial problems. All of them. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the card. Marcus Holloway, CEO, Holloway Technologies. I don't understand. Why would you help a complete stranger? Because you have something I need and I have something you need. That's called an efficient transaction. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Meet me tomorrow at Cafe Umbria noon. Come alone, and come prepared to listen. Before Sarah could respond, he turned and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum with the confidence of someone who knew she would come. And despite every logical thought screaming at her to throw away his card, Sarah knew he was right. She would be there. Because when you're drowning, you don't question the hand that reaches for you, you just grab it and pray. That night, Sarah researched Marcus Holloway until her eyes burned. Articles painted him as brilliant, ruthless, and intensely private. After his brother's death, he'd become a ghost in Seattle's social scene, attending only mandatory business functions. Philanthropist on paper, hermit in practice. The puzzle pieces didn't fit together, which made Sarah's anxiety spike higher. The cafe hummed with the lunch crowd when Sarah arrived precisely at noon, her best dress a simple navy wrap that had seen better days, feeling inadequate among the designer-clad professionals. Marcus sat at a corner table, 2 untouched espressos waiting, his attention fixed on her the moment she entered as if he'd been tracking her approach. You came, he said. Not quite a question. You knew I would. Sarah slid into the chair across from him, spine straight despite her racing heart. Your mother has 6 months without treatment, possibly 2 years with it. Marcus spoke with clinical precision, laying out her private nightmare like a business report. The experimental protocol at Swedish Medical Center costs exactly $237,000, plus ongoing care. You currently have $1,400 in your checking account and $17,000 in debt. Blood drained from Sarah's face. How do you know all of this? I'm thorough when making investments. He pushed 1 espresso toward her. I'm prepared to pay for everything. Every medical bill, every treatment, every medication your mother needs. I'll also clear your debts and provide you with a monthly stipend of $10,000. Sarah's world tilted. What do you want in return? Marcus leaned back, his expression unreadable. I want you to marry me. The cafe sounds faded. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the clink of cups. All of it disappeared into the roaring silence between them. Sarah stared at this stranger, this beautiful, terrifying man who'd just proposed to her with the warmth of a contract negotiation. You're insane, she whispered. I'm practical. I need a wife for business reasons, social appearances, networking advantages, family obligations. You need money immediately. We both get what we need. He slid a folder across the table. The agreement is detailed. A 2-year marriage contract, renewable if mutually agreed upon, all your mother's expenses covered indefinitely, regardless of the marriage outcome. In exchange, you'll attend events as my wife, maintain the appearance of a legitimate relationship, and ask no questions about my personal affairs. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the folder. The numbers swam before her eyes. More money than she'd see in a lifetime of teaching. I can't possibly. You can. And if you love your mother, you will. Marcus's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Meet me here tomorrow, same time. Bring your answer. As he stood to leave, Sarah found her voice. Why me? You could have anyone. Marcus paused, something flickering across his face too quickly to read. Because you have kind eyes, Miss Chen. And I need someone who won't ask me to feel things I can't anymore. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with an impossible choice and the ticking clock of her mother's mortality. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay in the darkness of her childhood bedroom, listening to her mother's labored breathing through the thin walls, each rasp a reminder of time slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. The folder Marcus had given her sat on her nightstand, its presence heavy as a confession she hadn't yet made. At 3 a.m, she finally opened it again and read every word by the glow of her phone. The contract was surprisingly straightforward for something so surreal. 2 years of marriage, public appearances as needed, separate bedrooms unless mutually agreed otherwise, a clause about fidelity that made her cheeks burn, and there in black and white the promise that changed everything. Complete medical coverage for her mother, regardless of cost, regardless of outcome, regardless of whether Sarah fulfilled the entire 2 years. He was offering her hope with no strings attached to the one thing that mattered most. That generosity, buried in a cold business transaction, confused her more than anything else. The next morning, Sarah sat across from her mother in the hospital room where they'd spent so many hours lately. Margaret Chen looked smaller than she had a month ago, her once vibrant face now paper-thin, but her eyes were still sharp, still full of the fierce love that had raised Sarah alone after her father left. Mom, what if I told you there was a way to pay for the treatment? Sarah's voice cracked on the words. Margaret reached for her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Baby, we've talked about this. I'm not letting you destroy your future for a few more months of my present. It's not destruction. It's just... Sarah took a breath. It's complicated. Over the next 20 minutes, she explained everything, watching her mother's expressions shift from shock to concern to something that looked almost like understanding. When Sarah finished, silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Do you trust him? Margaret finally asked. I don't know him well enough to trust him, but I believe he'll keep his word. That's not what I asked. Her mother's eyes held that penetrating wisdom that had always seen through Sarah's defenses. Do you feel safe with him? When you look at him, what does your heart tell you? Sarah thought about Marcus's cold proposition, but also about that flicker of vulnerability when he'd mentioned his inability to feel, about the catch in his voice that suggested his fortress had cracks. I think he's damaged, Mom. I think something broke him and he's trying to survive the only way he knows how. I think maybe I understand that. Margaret squeezed her hand tighter. Then you have my blessing, whatever you decide. But Sarah, promise me something. Don't lose yourself in someone else's brokenness. You have too much light to let it be dimmed by someone's darkness. At noon, Sarah walked into Cafe Umbria wearing determination like armor. Marcus was already there, same table, same unreadable expression, but today she noticed things she'd missed before. The shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. The way his fingers drummed against his coffee cup. The only nervous gesture in his otherwise controlled presence. The expensive watch that he kept checking as if measuring time differently than normal people. Miss Chen. He stood when she approached, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his modern ruthlessness. Mr. Holloway. Sarah remained standing, needing the height advantage even though he still towered over her. I have conditions. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe respect. I'm listening. First, my mother never knows this is a business arrangement. As far as she's concerned, we're a real couple who fell in love quickly. I won't have her final months clouded by guilt or worry. Marcus nodded slowly. Agreed, what else? Second, I keep teaching. I don't care about your social calendar or business obligations. I'm not abandoning my students. We work around my schedule, not just yours. That's acceptable. Anything else? Sarah's heart hammered, but she held his gaze. Third, we're honest with each other. I don't expect love or romance, but I expect respect and truth. No secrets that affect me directly. No lies about who you are or what you're doing. If this is a partnership, then we're partners. Equal ones. For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus smiled, really smiled, and the transformation was devastating. It softened the harsh angles of his face, made him look younger and infinitely more dangerous to her heart. You're stronger than I anticipated, he said quietly. That's good. I can work with strong. Is that a yes to my conditions? It's a yes to all of them, with one addition of my own. Marcus pulled out a small velvet box and Sarah's breath caught. If we're going to convince everyone this is real, we need to make it look real. This was my grandmother's ring. She was the only person in my family worth remembering, and I think she would have liked you. He opened the box to reveal a vintage sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, elegant and understated. Nothing like the ostentatious displays of wealth she'd expected. The band was worn smooth by decades of love, and something about that history made Sarah's throat tight. It's beautiful, she whispered. Put it on. It wasn't quite a command, more like a test. Sarah extended her left hand, and Marcus slid the ring onto her finger with surprising gentleness. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The weight of it felt like a promise and a sentence all at once. We'll marry in 2 weeks, Marcus said, still holding her hand. My lawyer will handle everything. You'll move into my house next weekend so we can establish the relationship publicly before the wedding. Any objections? Just one. Sarah met his eyes, refusing to be intimidated. What happens if one of us actually starts to feel something real? What happens if this fake marriage becomes complicated? Marcus's expression shuddered immediately, the brief warmth disappearing behind ice. That won't happen, Miss Chen. I told you I don't feel those things anymore, and I strongly suggest you don't either. This is business. Keep it that way and no one gets hurt. But as he released her hand and stood to leave, Sarah noticed something he probably didn't mean to reveal. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. His jaw clenched as if holding back words that wanted to escape. And his eyes, those cold winter storm eyes, looked at her one last time with something that definitely wasn't indifference. Sarah touched the sapphire on her finger and realized with absolute clarity that Marcus Holloway was lying. Not to her, but to himself. And that made everything infinitely more dangerous, because you can't fake your way out of real feelings no matter how good the contract is. Moving into Marcus Holloway's house felt like stepping into a museum where everything was beautiful, expensive, and completely untouchable. The modern masterpiece perched on Queen Anne Hill overlooked the entire Seattle skyline, all glass walls and clean lines that seemed designed to keep the world at a distance. Sarah stood in the massive foyer with her 2 suitcases, feeling like an intruder in a space that had never known warmth. Your room is upstairs. Second door on the left, Marcus said without looking at her, his attention fixed on his phone as he typed rapidly. Mine is at the end of the hall. There's a housekeeper who comes 3 times a week, a chef if you want meals prepared, and a driver available whenever you need. Make yourself comfortable. Comfortable. The word felt absurd in a house where even the furniture seemed to be holding its breath. Sarah dragged her suitcases up the sweeping staircase, each step echoing in the cavernous space. Her assigned bedroom was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites that felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Through the windows, the city spread out below like a promise of life happening somewhere else, to other people in ways that made sense. She unpacked slowly, hanging her modest wardrobe in a closet designed for 10 times as many clothes. Arranging her books on shelves that had never held anything personal, a framed photo of her mother went on the nightstand, the only splash of real color in the room. Margaret was smiling in the picture, taken before the cancer, before the fear, back when the future still felt like something to look forward to, rather than something to survive. That first week passed in strange isolation. Marcus left for work before dawn and returned after dark, their only interactions brief and transactional. He transferred money for her mother's first treatment. She signed papers his lawyer brought. They existed in the same space like ghosts haunting different centuries, never quite occupying the same moment. But Sarah noticed things. The way Marcus's coffee cup was always in the sink by the time she woke up, rinsed carefully and placed just so. How he left the hallway light on at night. A small concession to her arrival that he never mentioned. The stack of teaching magazines that appeared on the kitchen counter one morning, still wrapped in the bookstore bag, no note attached. Small gestures that contradicted his cold indifference, clues to a person hiding beneath the armor. On Friday evening, Sarah came home from school to find Marcus in the kitchen, actually cooking. The sight was so unexpected she stopped in the doorway, watching him move with surprising competence around the stove. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and something about seeing him this way, unguarded and domestic, made her heart do a strange flip. "You cook?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, and for just a moment she saw something flicker across his face. Embarrassment, maybe, or vulnerability. "My brother taught me." He said anyone who couldn't feed themselves was choosing to remain a child. The mention of his brother hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. "I made enough for two if you're hungry. We should probably practice eating together before the wedding anyway. Make it look natural." Sarah set down her bag and joined him at the kitchen island, watching as he plated pasta with the same precision he seemed to apply to everything. They ate in silence at first, but it was different from the absence of the past week. This silence felt full, pregnant with words neither knew how to speak. "How's your mother?" Marcus asked finally, his eyes on his plate. "Starting treatment on Monday. She's scared but hopeful." Sarah paused, gathering courage. "Thank you for making that possible. I know this is just business to you, but to me you're saving her life. That means everything." Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, and when he looked at her, something in his expression had shifted. "My brother used to say that the best business deals are the ones where everyone wins." Maybe he was right. He stood abruptly, clearing his plate. "We have a charity gala tomorrow night. My assistant will bring appropriate clothing. We need to make our first public appearance as a couple." The next evening, Sarah barely recognized herself in the mirror. The emerald green gown Marcus's assistant had delivered fit perfectly, elegant and sophisticated in a way that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. A stylist had done her hair and makeup, transforming her from elementary school teacher to billionaire's fiancé with practiced expertise. When she descended the stairs, Marcus was waiting in the foyer, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. But what stopped her heart was the way he looked at her. Really looked at her, with an intensity that made her skin warm and her breath catch. For 3 full seconds, his careful mask slipped, and she saw raw appreciation in his eyes, maybe even desire, before he shuttered it away. "You look acceptable," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You're a terrible liar," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Something almost like a smile touched his lips. "So I've been told." He offered his arm with old-fashioned formality. "Shall we go pretend to be in love?" The gala was held at a waterfront venue, glittering with Seattle's wealthy elite, all designer gowns and practiced smiles and conversations that felt like chess matches disguised as small talk. Sarah felt overwhelmed immediately, but Marcus's hand found the small of her back, steadying and warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "Stay close to me," he murmured against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "These people are sharks. They'll smell fear and circle." He introduced her to what felt like hundreds of people, his arm never leaving her waist, his attention somehow always on her even when he was talking to someone else. He laughed at her nervous jokes, finished her sentences when she stumbled, and looked at her with such convincing affection that Sarah found herself forgetting it was all performance. "You're good at this," she whispered during a quiet moment. "At what?" "Pretending to care." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What makes you think I'm pretending?" Before Sarah could respond, a woman's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Marcus Holloway, as I live and breathe. I heard rumors you'd finally found someone desperate enough to marry you." Sarah turned to see a stunning blonde in a red dress, her smile sharp as broken glass, her eyes calculating and cold. The way Marcus's entire body tensed told Sarah everything she needed to know about who this woman was. "Victoria," Marcus said, his voice flat. "I didn't realize you'd be here." "Oh, I wouldn't miss the chance to meet the woman who accomplished what I couldn't." Victoria's gaze raked over Sarah with obvious dismissal. "Tell me, dear, how much is he paying you? Because whatever it is, it's not enough to deal with his emotional unavailability and control issues." Sarah felt Marcus start to speak, but something fierce rose up in her chest. She thought about her mother fighting for every breath, about her students who believed in fairy tales, about all the broken people trying to survive in a world that demanded perfection. She stepped forward, inserting herself between Marcus and this venomous woman, and smiled with a grace she didn't know she possessed. "Actually, I'm not being paid anything," Sarah said clearly. "I'm here because I choose to be, because I see something in Marcus worth fighting for, even if he doesn't see it himself yet. And if you couldn't appreciate what you had, that says far more about your limitations than his." The gathered crowd had gone silent, watching this unexpected confrontation. Victoria's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Marcus's hand closed around Sarah's, pulling her away from the scene with controlled urgency. They ended up on a balcony overlooking the water, the sounds of the party muffled behind glass doors. Marcus was breathing hard, his hands gripping the railing like he was trying to hold himself together. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "Yes, I did." Sarah moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his heat. "You defended me in there, made me feel protected. I can do the same for you." Marcus turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his carefully constructed walls were crumbling. "Victoria was my fiancée. 3 years ago. She left 2 weeks before our wedding because I was too focused on work after my brother died. She said I was choosing grief over love, that I'd never be capable of real emotion again." "And you believed her," Sarah said softly, understanding dawning. "I believed her because she was right. After my brother died, something in me broke, Sarah. I stopped feeling things the way normal people do. Of joy, hope, they all felt distant, like watching life through glass instead of living it." His voice cracked. "That's why this arrangement made sense. I couldn't offer real love, so I offered something I could deliver. Money, security, a transaction." Sarah's heart ached for this broken man who'd convinced himself he was beyond repair. She reached up and gently turned his face toward hers, making him meet her eyes. "Marcus, grief doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. And the fact that you're still protecting people, still keeping your promises, still trying to do right even when you think you can't feel, that's not emptiness. That's love wearing different clothes."
He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed.
Then slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might disappear, he raised his hand and cupped her cheek. His thumb traced her cheekbone with a tenderness that contradicted everything he'd claimed about his emotional capacity. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered. "Maybe," Sarah breathed. "I'm reminding you how to feel." The kiss happened like gravity, inevitable and natural. Marcus pulled her close and pressed his lips to hers with a desperation that spoke of 3 years of numbness, finally cracking open. Sarah melted into him, tasting salt and sorrow and something that felt terrifyingly like hope. When they finally broke apart, both trembling, the world had shifted on its axis. "This complicates everything," Marcus said, but he didn't let her go. "I know," Sarah replied, her forehead resting against his. "The contract said no feelings. You also said you couldn't feel anymore. Seems like we're both breaking the rules." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "What do we do now?" Sarah smiled up at him, brave and terrified and absolutely certain. "We stop pretending this is fake and start building something real." In that moment, on that balcony above the glittering city, a marriage of convenience began its transformation into something neither of them had planned for, but both desperately needed. Love doesn't always arrive with fanfare and romance. Sometimes it sneaks in through the cracks of broken hearts, disguised as a business deal, and teaches two wounded people that healing is possible when you're brave enough to try. The wedding happened on a Saturday morning when autumn painted Seattle in shades of gold and amber. Sarah had expected something cold and formal, a courthouse ceremony with witnesses paid to care. Instead, Marcus had transformed his glass house into something magical. White flowers cascaded from every surface, soft music played from hidden speakers, and sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a blessing. Her mother sat in the front row, wrapped in a soft shawl, her eyes bright with tears and hope. The treatment was working. Slowly, miraculously, Margaret Chen was fighting her way back from the edge. And the gratitude Sarah felt threatened to overwhelm her every time she looked at the man waiting for her at the makeshift altar. Marcus stood beneath an arch of roses, and when Sarah walked toward him, his expression held none of the careful control she'd come to expect. His eyes shone with something raw and unguarded, something that looked remarkably like love, real love, not the pretend kind they'd agreed to fake. The officiant spoke words about commitment and partnership, but Sarah barely heard them. She was too focused on Marcus's hands holding hers, on the way his thumb traced circles on her palm like a secret message. When it came time for vows, Marcus surprised her by abandoning the traditional script. "Sarah," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I asked you to marry me because I thought I needed a solution to a problem. I was wrong. I didn't need a solution. I needed you. You walked into my life and reminded me that being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair. That feeling things, even painful things, is better than feeling nothing at all. I promise to spend every day earning the love you've given me so freely. I promise to protect your dreams as fiercely as you've protected mine. And I promise to never again confuse survival with living." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she spoke her own vows. "Marcus, you offered me a business deal, but you gave me so much more. You gave me hope when I had none, strength when I felt weak, and partnership when I felt alone. You think you're cold, but I've felt your warmth. You think you can't love, but I've seen your heart. I promise to stand beside you through every storm, to remind you of your goodness when you forget, and to build a life with you that's filled with all the messy, complicated, beautiful feelings you thought you'd lost." When Marcus kissed her as his wife, there was nothing transactional about it. It was a kiss that spoke of second chances and new beginnings, of two damaged people choosing to heal together rather than suffer alone. The small gathering of family and close friends erupted in applause, but Sarah heard only her own heartbeat and Marcus's whispered words against her lips. "I love you. God help me, I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Sarah whispered back, smiling through her tears. "Being terrified means you're alive. The months that followed were not perfect. Love never is. Marcus still worked too much, and Sarah still worried about money despite having no reason to. They argued about his tendency to solve her problems without asking, and her habit of taking on everyone else's burdens. They stumbled through learning each other's languages, made mistakes, apologized, and tried again. But they also laughed. Marcus discovered he had a terrible sense of humor that made Sarah snort laugh in the most undignified ways. Sarah introduced him to the joy of lazy Sunday mornings and spontaneous dance parties in the kitchen. They cooked together, with Marcus measuring everything precisely while Sarah threw in ingredients by feel. And somehow their different approaches created something delicious. Marcus attended every single one of Sarah's school performances, sitting in tiny chairs made for 6-year-olds, clapping the loudest when her students sang off-key. Sarah accompanied him to business dinners and learned to navigate his world with grace, but never changed who she was to fit in. She remained authentically herself, and Marcus loved her more for it. One evening, 6 months into their marriage, Sarah found Marcus in his study, staring at a photograph she'd never seen before. A teenage boy with Marcus's eyes smiled from the frame, full of life and possibility. "That's Daniel," Marcus said softly as Sarah joined him. "My brother. He was 17 when he died. A drunk driver ran a red light, and just like that, the best person I knew was gone." Sarah wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Tell me about him." And Marcus did. For the first time since his brother's death, he let himself remember without drowning. He told stories that made them both laugh and cry, painting a picture of a boy who loved fiercely and lived fully and left the world better than he found it. As Marcus spoke, Sarah felt the final walls around his heart crumble, and she knew they had crossed some invisible threshold into complete trust. "He would have loved you," Marcus finally said, turning to hold Sarah properly. "Daniel always said I needed someone who would call me on my nonsense and love me anyway. He would have said I didn't deserve you, but that I should marry you immediately before you figured that out. Well, Sarah said, wiping tears from both their faces. I think your brother was a very wise person, and I think he'd be proud of the man you've become, Marcus. Not the billionaire or the businessman, but the man who learned how to feel again. The man who chose love over safety. That night, wrapped in each other's arms, Marcus whispered the words that completed their transformation. This was never fake for me, Sarah. From that first moment in the hospital corridor, something in me recognized something in you. I told myself it was just business because I was too afraid to admit I was capable of falling in love again. But I was falling from the very beginning. You didn't just agree to marry me. You saved me. Sarah kissed him softly, tasting salt and truth and tomorrow. Then we saved each other. Because I was drowning too, Marcus. Drowning in fear and responsibility and the weight of keeping everyone else afloat. You didn't just pay for my mother's treatment. You gave me permission to be human, to need help, to accept love without earning it first. Margaret Chen lived another 3 beautiful years. Long enough to see her daughter truly happy. Long enough to hold her granddaughter for the first time. Long enough to tell Sarah that she'd been right all along. Sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. When Marcus and Sarah's daughter was born, they named her Hope. Because that's what they had given each other when neither believed it was possible anymore. Hope for tomorrow, hope for healing. Hope that love could grow in the most unlikely soil and bloom into something stronger than either person could create alone. Years later, sitting on their porch watching Hope chase butterflies through the garden they'd planted together, Sarah thought about the desperate woman who'd walked into a cafe to meet a stranger with an impossible proposal. She thought about the broken man who'd convinced himself he was beyond repair. And she marveled at how 2 people, each carrying their own wounds, had somehow become each other's healing. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked, reading her mind the way he'd learned to do. The way we started? Sarah leaned into him, breathing in the scent of home. Not even for a second. We didn't begin with romance or passion or any of the things people think you need for love to last. We began with honesty and desperation and a willingness to try. And maybe that's exactly what real love is, not the fairy tale beginning, but the choice to keep choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Marcus kissed the top of her head, and in that simple gesture lived all the love he'd once believed he could never feel. I married you for all the wrong reasons, he murmured. But I stayed married to you for all the right ones. And there, in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate sorrows, Sarah Chen Holloway understood the greatest truth of all. Love doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes disguised as a business deal, a desperate choice, a calculated risk. But when 2 brave souls are willing to be vulnerable, to drop their armor and show their scars, that's when real magic happens. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And real, messy, complicated, beautiful love is the only kind worth fighting for. The end of their beginning, and the beginning of everything that mattered.